Hey Rayleigh, and anybody else watching, and welcome back to another message from your father. So today, 1 Kings 10 and 11, and we got some really interesting stuff to look at today, thanks to one of the notes in the Bible that I'm using, the Student Study Bible. Very, very cool stuff. What did we look at? So yesterday, the Ark was moved into the temple, so we saw that. We saw Solomon's prayer of dedication. And then beyond that, we saw a couple of Solomon's other activities, and most notably, the Lord appearing to Solomon. So just as God had given all the leaders before this direction, he's also given Solomon direction as well. Today, we are going to be looking at the visit from the Queen of Sheba, and Solomon is going to essentially be showing off his wisdom. Beyond that, we also see a lot of his wealth and how much he's getting annually. It's a lot, by the way. Beyond that, we'll look at Solomon's death and then Jeroboam's rebellion as well. So again, a lot of interesting stuff to take a look at. 10 and 11 are the chapters we're in. So, chapter 10. When the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relation to the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. Arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan, with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom that Solomon and the palace that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true, but I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth, you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your men must be. How happy your officials, who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices, and precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought as in those that the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Hiram's ships that brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of amalgam wood and precious stones. The king used the amalgam wood to make supports for the temple of the Lord, and for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much amalgam wood was never been imported or seen since that day. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, not including the revenues from merchants and traders, and from all the Arabian kings and governors of the land. King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 bekas of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 small shields of hammered gold, with 3 minas of gold in each shield. The king put them in the palace of the forests of Lebanon. Then the king made a great throne inlaid with ivory and overlaid with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps, and its back had a rounded top. On both sides of the seat were armrests, with a lion standing beside each of them. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, one at either end of each step. Nothing like it had ever been made for any other kingdom. All King Solomon's goblets were gold, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's day. The king had a great fleet of trading ships at sea, along with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years it returned, carrying gold, silver, and ivory, and apes and baboons. King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift: articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons and spices, and horses and mules. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities, and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt, and from Ku. The royal merchants purchased them from Ku. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. They also exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and the Armenians. Chapter 11. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from the nations which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your heart after other gods, or after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I have commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it until in your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David, my servant, for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." Then the Lord raised up against Solomon an adversary, Hadad the Edomite, from the royal line of Edom. Earlier, when David was fighting with Edom, Joab, the commander of the army, who had gone up to bury the dead, had struck down all the men in Edom. Joab and all the Israelites stayed there for 6 months, until they had destroyed all the men in Edom. But Hadad, still only a boy, fled to Egypt, with some Edomite officials who had served his father. They set out from Midian and went to Paran. Then, taking men from Paran with them, they went to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave Hadad a house and land, and provided him with food. Pharaoh was so pleased with Hadad that he gave him a sister of his own wife, Queen Taphanes, in marriage. The sister of Taphanes bore him a son named Genubath, who Taphanes brought up in the royal palace. Then Genubath lived with Pharaoh's own children. While he was in Egypt, Hadad heard that David rested with his fathers, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was also dead. Then Hadad said to Pharaoh, "Let me go, that I may return to my own country." "What have you lacked here that you want to go back to your own country?" Pharaoh asked. "Nothing," Hadad replied, "but do let me go." And God raised up Solomon another adversary, Rezin, son of Eliada, who had fled from his master, Hadadezer, king of Zobah. He gathered men around him and became the leader of a band of rebels. When David destroyed the forces of Zobah, the rebels went to Damascus, where they settled and took control. Rezin was Israel's adversary as long as Solomon lived, adding to the trouble caused by Hadad. So Rezin ruled in Aram and was hostile towards Israel. Also, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, rebelled against the king. He was one of Solomon's officials, an Ephraimite from Zereda. His mother was a widow named Zeruah. Here is the account of how he rebelled against the king. Solomon had built the supporting terraces and had filled in the gap of the wall of the city of David, his father. Now Jeroboam was a man of standing. And when Solomon saw how well the young man did his work, he put him in charge of the whole labor force of the house of Joseph. About that time, Jeroboam was going out of Jerusalem, and Ahijah, the prophet of Shiloh, met him on the way, wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone out in the country, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen, out of all the tribes of Israel, he will have 1 tribe. I will do this because they have forsaken me and worship Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, and have not walked in my ways, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my statutes and laws as David, Solomon's father, did. But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him a ruler all the days of his life for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose and who observed my commands and statutes. I will take the kingdom from his own hands and give you the 10 tribes. I will give one tribe to his son, so that David, my servant, may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I chose to put my name. However, as for you, I will take you, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. You will be king over Israel. If you do what I command you, and walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes, by keeping my statutes and commands, as David, my servant, did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king, and stayed there until Solomon's death. As for the other events of Solomon's reign, all he did and the wisdom he displayed, are they not written in the book of the annals of Solomon? Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. Then he rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, his father, and Rehoboam, his son, succeeded him as king. So we see a couple different interesting things here, as we always do. But one thing I wanted to make note of was the excess that he displays here. And it was pointed out to me by a note that is in relation to chapter 10, verse 14. So this is talking about all his splendor. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, not including the revenues from the merchants and traders from all the Arabian kings and the governors of the land. So 666 talents is about 25 tons of gold per year. So it's really interesting. Anyway, so the note says, this passage, 10:14 through 29, graphically illustrates how far Solomon had strayed from God's ideal. The book of Deuteronomy cites Moses' forthright warnings about what kind of king should rule over Israel. Solomon defied those warnings by acquiring huge numbers of horses, getting involved in foreign trade, taking many wives, and accumulating silver and gold. So just as a reminder, Deuteronomy 17:14 through 20 is, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us, like all the other nations around us. Be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from among your own brothers. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not a brother Israelite. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them, for the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. So it's interesting, and I'm kind of left with a couple questions there. The first question is, well, and I'll read them both at the same time. Why did God give him so much gold? And who upheld their promise? So why, if that's not the type of king that Israel should have, why did God give him so much gold? Why did God give him so much wealth and have people keep bringing stuff to him? Well, I think that's a little bit hinted at this second question. Who upheld their promise? Well, we see that God said, hey, if you do right by me, then I will make sure that you have wisdom in abundance. You will rule my people. You will have a legacy, a lineage. And he does. And Solomon asks for wisdom, and God says, I'll give you wisdom. But because you asked for wisdom and not for splendor right out and gold and the death of your enemies, I'm going to give you wisdom. But I'm also going to give you all this other stuff as well. So we see that God keeps his promise. That's what he promised to do. Now, this doesn't abdicate Solomon of his responsibility. He still has a responsibility to lead God's people wisely. And again, we know that these people often knew the law. I say often, probably almost assuredly always better than we knew it. So they know what type of king they should have over them. So what is Solomon doing with his wealth? Well, he's using it to build his temple and create gold lions and gold steps and goblets made of gold and shields. I think it says about each shield was about 7.5 pounds of gold in each shield. So all this splendor Solomon acquires for himself. And we don't see him necessarily giving back to the people because of that. Now, some of that may have happened, but that's not explicitly what the text says. Beyond that, what's infinitely worse than that is Solomon taking all these wives and putting up idols in Israel. So people see exactly what he's doing. And all these wives that God told him not to acquire are in fact leading him astray. So again, why would God do this and give him great wealth? Because God's upholding his promise that he made to him and that he made to David. Beyond that, though, we don't see Solomon keeping his promise. In fact, far from it. And in fact, that's what is some of the undoing of his legacy. So definitely sad stuff. So my prayer for you, Rayleigh, is that you would recognize that keeping your word to God is so important. And when you fail, he is gracious and compassionate. But that doesn't mean that we always just rely on it and live as we will. It's so, so important because he will keep his promises to us. Anyway, know that I love you. I'm praying for you. For anyone else that's listening as well, know that I appreciate you. I'll plan on seeing you tomorrow. Have a good one.